Yeah, there are a lot of life lessons there, that's for sure. Perhaps the biggest thing for me was, when you're studying to do something you love to do, boy, is it fun. Angel Flight West, its biggest challenge, and I sort of touched on this when I said I didn't want to blow my own trumpet about these flights, but its biggest challenge is getting the word out. And this is the same across the country for all charitable flight organizations. They all face the same issue. We're all good people wanting to help, but getting the word out is critical. Anyway, is that I would absolutely love to have a ride in the Spitfire. That is absolutely, again, for obvious reasons, why it is my favorite airplane by far. So aviation has given me, something that I learned to love to do. I was always excited by airplanes as a youngster, and I couldn't believe that I was in control of one. Wherever you are in life, I encourage people to, if you can, because it's never that easy, but you hear the follow the dreams and all that stuff, just focus on doing what you're good at, and time takes care of the rest.
Someone once said that every boy's heart races a little faster at the sight of a shiny sports car. I think that was true for me, and I think that becomes more true when we talk about shiny airplanes. The fun thing about today's conversation with Richard Beattie is that both of us have a background that's both in automotive and in aviation. So this is going to be a fun exploration of both the automotive and aviation industries and the experience that we can have doing good for people in both those capacities. Richard, welcome to the Plane Success Podcast. I appreciate you taking time to be here. Would you say that it was true that as a little boy, your heart raced at the sight of a shiny sports car? And is that what took you into automotive? Or tell me about your automotive career.
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me, Alan. It's great to be on here and great to be able to communicate with some existing and prospective Angel Flight pilots. That's really what this is all about. So getting folks to use their machines to help others is what this is all about. But anyway, to answer your question, I was fortunate enough to be born in the UK, as you can tell from my accent right now, but very close to the Silverstone race circuit, where for those of you who follow either Formula One racing or the Netflix Drives to Survive, you'll see shots of Silverstone where the British Grand Prix is held every year. And so I was 7 miles from Silverstone, where I was born. So as a young kid, I would go along and watch all the famous names and the open top racers race in the Grand Prix in the UK. So yes, a little bit of that was in my blood to start out with, but by the same token, I was building plastic models of aeroplanes and hanging them from my bedroom ceiling as a 9-year-old. So I think I was looking back as into both of them equally. I was also very interested in boats and sailing, and I probably started out down that avenue hobby-wise before any of the others. And then, time moves on, and Ford Motor Company were kind enough to give me a scholarship to university to do a business degree, and that was the beginning of a 34-year career with Ford around the world. And as my family and I moved around, we were certainly involved in cars and trucks, and not just the day-to-day run-of-the-mill vehicles, but some exciting ones too. I even got to drive probably the most famous Jaguar sports car. With its license plate is NUB 120, and it's known as NUB 120. And I drove that in the Mille Miglia 1,000 miles in Italy, which used to be a race, and now it's a parade of cars on a time trial. It's probably one of the most fantastic things I've ever done. But that was just a whole thing to itself. Other vehicles that I was involved with, Ford had a lot of ownership with of other brands at the time I came through, and it purchased Jaguar initially, then Land Rover, bought and sold Volvo, obviously sold Jaguar and Land Rover latterly to the Tata Group. I also had management control of Mazda in North America, and I was the president and CEO of the US business for 4 years or so, and still within my Ford career. But again, along that journey, I went to Oshkosh one year, and at the invitation of Mike Dale, the then president of Jaguar Cars North America, an avid pilot, and noticed that the vehicles driving around the campus at Oshkosh all had little magnetic stick-ons the doors that said Buick area, Wisconsin area Buick dealers. And I thought, well, we can do better than that. So it took a little time to put it together, but we started out with my alma mater, Ford, being the big sponsor at EAA and was for many years. Less so now. I think only the last couple of years they're refocusing their priorities as they see best, and I respect that. But we had a good run, probably 25 years of Ford and the EAA being very close together. So yeah, that's a little bit of the shiny cars, the race cars, the transition to aviation, and along that journey, one day I went with a car dealer from Long Island in his twin Cessna up to Boston for a meeting, and he said, and I was fascinated by it all, and he said, "Richard, why don't you learn how to fly?" So that was 1996, I think. And so I've never looked back. I just absolutely love it.
Do you remember your first discovery flight, and what do you remember about that?
When you say discovery, you mean just experiential, first time in the air?
Yeah, when you first started training, so the first opportunity where you know that you're going to be learning how to fly. What do you remember about that experience?
I remember the takeoff was almost automatic, and the clever flight instructor gave me full credit. But the airplane did what it was designed to do, and I just sat there basically. But he said that was a wonderful takeoff, I think. But so he's a smart guy, so I kept coming back. But I don't really remember that much. I remember all screwing up, nothing serious, but missing a couple of calls and not turning on final when I should have done. And I remember being thrown in the pool after my solo. That was great. But I also remember, and I think it sort of coloured my aviation journey even to date. I was signed off by the instructor to take the check ride, and I said to the instructor, I said, "I'm not ready," and he said, "Well, why not?" I said, "I'm not happy with my crosswind landing performance." So I took probably another 15 hours of training focusing on crosswind landings in a Cessna 172 before I said, "Okay, now I'm ready to get the check ride." And I think not each one to their own, but I think even then I was a fairly mature student. If I was 18 or 19 all over again, I would say, "Oh, great, I'm ready to go. Let's go." But I had family responsibilities, and I wanted to make sure I didn't screw up big time. So, yeah.
Richard, what are some of the big lessons that you feel like you've learned flying from those first lessons to where you're at now with several thousand hours of flying? What are some of the highlight lessons that you feel like you've learned that, maybe it can just be about aviation, but I find there's a lot of lessons about life that I've learned from flying airplanes.
Yeah, there are a lot of life lessons there, that's for sure. Perhaps the biggest thing for me was, when you're studying to do something you love to do, boy, is it fun. And oftentimes that ends up in you being, though I say it myself and forgive me, but reasonably good at it. Let's put it that way. And wherever you are in life, I encourage people to, if you can, because it's never that easy, but you hear the follow the dreams and all that stuff. Just focus on doing what you're good at, and time takes care of the rest. oversimplification, but it's amazing. There are so many folks, and I've been talking to a buddy of mine called Darren Pleasance. He just wrote a book on this subject, but there are so many people who get through life. Some of them make a lot of money, but they're not really happy. So aviation has given me, something that I learned to love to do. I was always excited by airplanes as a youngster, and I couldn't believe that I was in control of one. But along that journey too, as well as when getting my instrument rating, for example, I just ate that up. I just loved the fact that I was learning to do something that was just amazing. It's not just the pilot. We all know if you have an instrument rating, but even if you haven't, you can imagine if you're into aviation that it's the combination of the airplane, the pilot, the air traffic controllers, the weather systems on the ground, the ILSs, these days the satellites, everything working in harmony to get you safely on the ground. And I just really enjoyed studying hard for my instrument rating, and then allowing myself the opportunity to never go down to minimums. That's not me, but I certainly had some pretty challenging approaches that I've brought to a successful end, and always thought, wow, this is just an incredible system here in the US that allows folks like us to do this stuff. So yeah, it's life lessons are, hang on and do what you love to do. I think the safety aspect of my flying, and I've learned from a lot of people, I don't invent this stuff myself. I enjoy learning, and I don't think you're ever too old to learn anything, no matter how experienced you are. And I just absolutely enjoy trying to make my missions, whether I'm the solo pilot, nobody else is in it, or I've got a bunch of Angel Flight passengers in the back, I want to make sure that this mission is as safe as possible. Otherwise, I don't go. So that safety mentality is also on display, I hope, when I drive, I boat, whatever I do, I try and do it as safely as possible.
I'm sure the kids and the grandkids appreciate that safety mentality.
Yeah.
What kind of an impact has your joyful journey through aviation had on your family? What's their experience with aviation?
I think the answer to that is mixed. None of it's negative. It's just, my son is as enthusiastic as I am, but he's a young dad with 3 young boys, and he's not quite ready yet. And I started pretty late in my 40s, so he's late 30s now, so he's still got time. But and I have 2 kids, so my daughter and my wife, they will happily come along if that is the only means of transportation at their disposal. So, whereas I will go up for a flight just for the fun of it, and they're not particularly interested in that. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who faces not a dilemma, but it's just you have to respect what people want and not force it on them, I think. So
yeah.
Yep.
I think your wife and my wife would probably get along pretty well. I think Steph will tolerate it occasionally. She doesn't love it, but also I don't love gardening, and she does. So
that's exactly the same here. Exactly the same.
So I don't get in the way of the gardening. I never say no to buying a bush or a tree or a plant, and so far she hasn't said no to me flying airplanes. So
there you go.
I think and I'm absolutely asking blind here because I don't know. When you first started flying, were there concerns that your wife had with that? Because obviously that's a pretty big change, and for a lot of people, it's either a bucket list thing where they've always wanted to do it, or it's something they're terrified of and they never want the experience of being in a small plane. What were your wife's feelings when you told her, hey, I think I want to learn how to fly an airplane?
Oh, she was very supportive and encouraging. Obviously there's something in the back of her mind says, is this dangerous? But throughout I'm lucky that she's been extremely supportive of me doing what I love to do. Yeah, I'm lucky in that regard. We haven't side by side done the comparison of the airplane expenses versus the backyard expenses. I think I'm slightly ahead, but yeah, she's been very encouraging and has no issues with her flying with me. Or I think again, I want to be careful how I categorize this, but I'm lucky enough to have a wife who respects what I do and appreciates the approach I take to flying, that she's totally comfortable. Particularly when I say, no, we're not going because the weather's marginal or something's not quite right with the machine. She appreciates the fact that she knows she's going to be in good hands when she's in the air, if I can say at least that. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful. In your automotive career, people always used to ask me what my favorite car was. Did you have, over your time, you dealt with so many different kinds of cars and experiences, and maybe it's not fair to say was there a favorite, but what were some of the favorite cars or favorite experiences driving that you had over that career?
Well, I mentioned the most famous car ever that I got to drive for several days in Italy. And that's head and shoulders above everything else. When you're in the car business on the factory side, you're lucky enough that part of your compensation package is a vehicle, and usually you get one every year. Let's keep it that way. And so you get to try all sorts of things, and there is no one standout. And as time changes, the specifications change, expectations change. I can reflect on the first time, moving. I was actually working for Ford in Germany, and they transferred me to Detroit for the first time in the US. And I just had to have a 5-liter Mustang GT convertible. There's this Brit going up and down Southfield Freeway in this magnificent beast of an engine that had hopeless handling, but spectacular straight line performance. And that to me was, memorable. And I've had a bunch of other really nice vehicles, and I've been lucky enough to do that. To try and answer your question, because I think it always deserves an answer, I think the one vehicle that on a day-to-day basis, rather than some spectacular standout high-performance machine, but a day-to-day car that I would always said I would enjoy having this and that is whatever the latest and greatest Range Rover is. I can't help the Britishness in me. I have that connection. And when it was part of Ford, I was running marketing and sales for the brand as well. So I have an allegiance there, which a Range Rover is a spectacular vehicle. It does everything well.
I'd love to ask the same question about airplanes. You've had a fairly extensive experience now with airplanes.
Yeah.
You're flying what it is on my bucket list to own, a Bonanza A36. I think it's a very perfect combination between carrying capacity and speed and classic design. There's so many great things about that, but what have been some of the highlight aviation experiences that you've had, whether that's because of an airplane or because of the destination or the trip or who you were with? What stands out to you there?
Well, I've been lucky as an EAA board member for coming up 24 years now. There's been opportunity over the years to fly some really cool stuff. And in fact, just last Friday, I went to Bend, Oregon, and I mentioned Darren Pleasance earlier on, super young man. He has a share in a P-51, which has dual controls. So I flew the Bonanza down from here in Anacortes, Washington, down to Bend, Oregon, and he and I went flying in his machine, and I'm sat in the back, of course, but able to control, pitch bank as well as rudder, and if I wanted throttle, but he wouldn't let me. Uh, but so that's just last week. It was just, and I'm still sending videos around to the family with great enthusiasm. But along the way, I've sat in the left seat of a trimotor, a B-17, and but to answer your question, the first part of your question anyway is that I would absolutely love to have a ride in a Spitfire. That is absolutely, again, for obvious reasons, why it is my favorite airplane by far. On the airliner side, I've been lucky enough to sit in the cockpit of the Concorde while we're, cruising along at twice the speed of sound across the Atlantic, which is pretty nice. But it's still not real flying. That's the real flying is smelling the oil and the fumes and just going low over the mountains. That's real flying. So, yeah.
Well, Richard, I'm not sure what kind of leverage being a wing leader for Angel Flight West has, or now having you on the podcast, but if that equals a ride in a P-51 Mustang, I'm going to be cashing in on that. That is absolutely, in fact, you can't probably quite see, you may be able to see behind me in the background, but I have a P-51 on the wall, and you talked about Ford's version. You obviously can see the pony behind me. I have, for as long as I can remember, always been fascinated with both the automotive version of the Mustang and the aviation version, and had the fortune to be able to own the automotive version. Not quite there on the aviation version yet.
Yeah, a little different.
I love the experience of being in the Concorde and a B-17, and I was actually going to ask you if you'd had the chance to be in a Spitfire, because that's an airplane that I would love to have the opportunity to sit in the cockpit, and just the nostalgia behind what that plane and what the aviators who flew those machines defending the British Islands and then beyond that, just such an iconic aircraft. And is that something where there's a path to be able to do that for you? I know there's not a lot of those aircraft that are operational now. So.
Yeah, that's true. There is a path, absolutely. It's challenges a financial one only. And out of Duxford near Cambridge in eastern England, I believe there's an operation there that will allow you to go fly a dual controlled Spitfire. So yes, I don't have the bucket list term and all that sort of stuff. I think that's the only thing I have on my bucket list. There's nothing else. I've been fortunate in life. Everything has gone well for me, and I'm very grateful to everybody who's helped me out on that journey. That's the only thing that I would like to do. Everything else I'm quite fine with.
Okay, well, when it looks like you're going to do that, let me know, and we'll mortgage the house. We'll sell the farm. I'll go with you to have that experience.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
That's definitely one that is on my bucket list. And what an amazing adventure that would be. And to do it, I can't imagine anything more amazing than just going over like the White Cliffs of Dover.
Yeah.
And
of course, it's happening, this week because it's the 80th anniversary of D-Day on the 6th. So their planes are all gathering from across the Atlantic, flying back to France and England to do the reenactment on June 6th. So a lot of wonderful machines are already over there now, amassing for that memorial event.
Yeah, what an amazing experience. Richard, you and I both volunteer for Angel Flight West. I would love to know how you discovered Angel Flight West and some of the experiences that you've had, both as a pilot, maybe in other volunteer capacities. I don't know what your experience has been there, but also being on the board. And then if you just talk a little bit about the mission of Angel Flight West, what you love about it, and I'll just leave that there.
Yeah, so I always knew with my love of flying, but being a busy automotive career guy, that one day the time would come when I'd hang up my career boots, but the flying would continue. And I decided that I didn't really do any research on it, but I just decided that if I can help in any way, to use the much used expression, rather than go punch holes in the sky and go for $100 hamburger, why don't I, when I go flying, see if I can help some people who need to get from A to B? So retirement came along, and a neighbor of mine who has a Piper Seneca was and is a member of Angel Flight West. And he and I were talking about flying. He's a bit younger than I am, probably 20 years younger than me. And I asked him about, what he was doing, and he described the organization and what he did. And his legs were mainly from Orange County up to San Luis Obispo and back. That was his favorite route, and there was a lot of need for help in on that route. So he was doing it, and still is, pretty regularly. And that sort of piqued my interest. And, I made a few calls and got online and did the necessary qualification testing all online. And then, time came for my my first flight, which was a wonderful experience for me personally. It was also, I'm pleased to say, a great experience for the people that needed my help. But we all recognize how lucky we are and how unfortunate some of these patients are, and regardless of their condition and age and all that stuff, people just need help, and we're in a position to help out. So it's a wonderful wonderful organization. I remember talking to Josh, the executive director, Josh Olson, and I said, I don't really want to strut my stuff. It's not, if I want to talk about myself, and here I am on this podcast talking about myself, I can do that. But I find self-promotion is not my sweet spot. And I say the problem I found I don't like talking about what I do for Angel Flight West, because I don't want to strut my stuff. He said, Richard, don't be so ridiculous. And this Josh is the same age as my son. And I said, you can't talk to me like that. And he said, don't be ridiculous, Richard. We need you guys to talk about Angel Flight West in public, so that the organization becomes more and more well known, such that if somebody has a connection or knows of a patient who needs help, word gets out. So that changed my tune. And the very fact that I agreed to join you here, and the very fact that you're doing what you're doing, God bless you, it's helping promote this wonderful organization who exists to help people who, for often financial, sometimes simply large geographic distances involved, they need to get to care centers that are remote from where they live. Now, remoteness can be a question of geography, but also a question of time. So where I was based in Southern California, it was geography. We'd go Las Vegas and Phoenix and bringing people back into LA and this, that, and the other, up to San Francisco. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, it's the islands. There are a lot of people who their dream was to have a house on an island, or they were born there. There are communities, towns on these islands. But when something happens and these folks need help, and we're lucky up here, we have a fantastic hospital center in Seattle and a few other satellite facilities as well. But Seattle, big cancer care in particular. And if you live on San Juan Island, Friday Harbor, it's a nice town, has an airport, has a ferry dock. But if you don't know anything about Angel Flight West and you need to get to cancer treatment, and you got to do it 2 or 3 times a week or for the next 3 months, it takes door to door, takes about 6 hours driving and on the ferry. The Bonanza flight from Friday Harbor Airport to Boeing Field in downtown Seattle is 35 minutes. Wow. And you can see that is Angel Flight, and I'm happy, very pleased to be living up here so I can help. And other pilots do as well. There's a bunch of us up here who fly those missions in and out every week, unless the weather is bad. Of course, we don't go anywhere in bad weather. But it's transforming for these folks who otherwise have all the stress of that 6-hour journey. And then guess what? They have to come back because they can't afford to stay in a hotel down there all week. It's just nuts. So it's really, really good. And they're very appreciative. We'll get a hat or we'll get some cookies from these lovely people. And we also fly kids as well. There's a natural tendency for pilots to want to fly kids. We all get that, but they're less frequent than the older folks like me, who knows what illness you're going to get next. But it is wonderful flying kids, especially kids with special needs. And you see the look on their faces and their parents when they're at the airport when you land and they're there to greet you. It gets you. So it's a fabulous organisation. I've just started out on the board, so this is my first semester, as it were, and looking forward to help steer the organisation as well as continue to fly flights.
Richard, you said that first flight meant a lot to you. Can you tell me more about that? How did that touch you? How did it impact you? What was the situation of the person that you were flying?
She was cancer treatment in UC Irvine and lived in Henderson, just near Las Vegas, Nevada. And my first flight was returning her and her husband home. Another pilot had flown them out for the inbound leg. So there I am, and I don't. It's like water off a duck's back when you've done a few of them, and they all say the first one is the biggest challenge, and it's not a challenge operationally. I think it's a challenge for the pilot just to sort of get across the first flight hurdle, because it's really fairly straightforward, and that you try and distance yourself from the patient's condition. If the patient wants to talk to you about their condition, then of course you have an open ear to that. But you don't want to pry, and nor should you. It's none of your business. But many of them like to chat, and I think it's a relief for them. They enjoyed the scenery, even though it's only desert. They still thought it was cool to be flying, at a relatively low altitude over the freeways and the 120 wagon trains that were going below us, and but they landed, and they give you a hug. It's very special, very special. So I flew back to Orange County with a smile on my face, saying, "Well, that's good. I did some good today. That's great."
Yeah, when I think of some of the missions that I've done, you develop, not with every passenger, but you develop a close bond with people. And so I got into aviation actually as a relief from grief. I lost my mother-in-law in 2018 to cancer, lost my father-in-law in 2019 to cancer, and then I lost my dad to a stroke in 2020.
Wow.
And I woke up at 43 years old, and my dad was 66 when he passed. And I thought, wow, what if there's only 20 more of these revolutions around the sun? And one of the things that I'd always wanted to do was to fly airplanes. And I just hadn't allowed myself to do it to that point. And I was really searching for, just a lift from the grief that not only me, but my family had experienced. And that was my first flight. And I can remember very distinctly lifting off the ground. And again, I think maybe there's some instruction they give to instructors to make new students think that they're really doing something special when the plane flies all on its own and you think you've just taken off. But I really felt like a lot of my worries and troubles stayed on the ground and a new person was born in the air. And as soon as I was able, I didn't know anything about Angel Flight West, but I began looking for aviation charities. How can I give back using this thing that's been so impactful for me? And discovered Angel Flight West, and then I did my first mission. And like you, it was my first passenger happened to live in Bullhead City and was driving to Phoenix Children's Hospital, about a 5-hour drive. At the time, he was 18 years old, and to be able to have the experience of shortening someone's journey to get the care that they need by 80% was so impactful. Another impactful experience that I had, it was I got invited to participate with the Pediatric Care Committee at Yuma Regional Medical Center. And I shared the mission of Angel Flight West, providing free flights for people in need of care far from home. And the lady sitting next to me after I finished said, "Oh, I wish we had known about that." And then she shared how her daughter, Addie, had been born with a congenital heart defect. And they traveled from Yuma to Phoenix Children's Hospital for her care, and that was about a 4-hour drive. And so you can imagine these parents leaving, if they have a 9 o'clock appointment, they're leaving at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, driving, spending whatever time they need to spend in the hospital, and then driving back. It becomes, a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-hour day. And she said, "You don't know my story, but this was also in 2020. She said, Addie got sick, and we scheduled an appointment with her doctor in Phoenix and started the drive from Yuma to Phoenix Children's Hospital. And they only made it about halfway, and Addie passed away."
Oh, gosh.
And she said, maybe if we had known, maybe we would have been on the ground. And up to that point, Richard, you and I have a similar business background. And in the business world, for me, it was number driven. I want to sell X number of cars and make X amount of money. So when I started helping to grow Angel Flight West in Arizona, I had a very similar mindset. I'm going to double the number of flights, double the number of pilots. We're going to raise $1 million, whatever those goals were. And that completely changed in that meeting with her. And I thought, I just don't ever want another mom to say, "I wish I had known."
Right.
And maybe that doesn't mean that we double the number of flights, double the number of patients. But if it means that a little girl with a congenital heart defect gets to the care that she needs, and her parents don't have the experience of sitting with their daughter on the side of the road for 4 hours waiting for the coroner, then it doesn't matter what sacrifice I have to make, what time I have to spend. And that was the motivation for starting the Plane Success podcast, was how many pilots, how many people can I tell so that I don't have that experience again? So maybe it's a little bit selfish that I just don't want that experience again.
No, it's not at all selfish, and that's, it's a very sad story, but they happen all the time. And Angel Flight West, its biggest challenge, and I sort of touched on this when I said I didn't want to blow my own trumpet about these flights, but its biggest challenge is getting the word out. It's so difficult to, we don't have marketing budgets. We rely on hospitals, social workers, and individual patients to call us. And there's so much demand out there, but it's not being satisfied because people don't know we're there. And this is the same across the country for all charitable flight organizations. They all face the same issue. We're all good people wanting to help, but getting the word out is critical. So, your audience today and on other podcasts you have, just encourage them to spread the word as best they can. They don't, if they're thinking about flying and they're not sure, then I encourage them to fly. But respect that if they don't, it's not for them yet. They're not ready. That's totally fine. But get out there and spread the word, because even doing that can help in a big way.
Yeah. Richard, what do you see as the future of Angel Flight West? What from a board level, and I realize that you're in the beginning season of that, so maybe it's not fair to ask the rookie. But what do you envision for Angel Flight West and the impact that our pilots and other volunteers can make?
Well, I mean, envisioning, or as we Brits say, envisaging a future is, you know, you can use a paintbrush and paint something, and that's fine. But I'm more interested in, you know, okay, what are we doing next week? Where are we going? And every organization has to have its goals, and we have ours too. The biggest challenge is that, you know, the execution, the executive piece of what we do is a small team of people based in Santa Monica, all with their hearts so wonderfully in the right place and with many, many talents, but it's still a small group of people. And the volunteer side of Angel Flight West is critical. And so, you know, we need more volunteers, whether they're pilots, whether they're Earth Angels, whether they're folks who contact hospital communities or care centers, go out and spread the word. Then you don't just have to be a pilot to help Angel Flight West, and helping us is helping patients. So growing that, satisfying that demand, making sure that, you know, no patient is left, is turned away because we don't have a mission other than for weather reasons. I think that's the biggest challenge we have, and I'm not going to paint a picture whereby in 5 years' time it's going to be, you know, a nice rosy picture that's so much better than it ever was. It takes a lot of work to. The flying bit's the easy bit. It's the getting awareness out there. That's as we said earlier, you're helping with this, so good for you. It's great that you're doing stuff like this. I wish there were more folks like you who could grab that microphone and have the technology to do stuff like this and get the word out.
I appreciate that, Richard. Is there a passenger that you've become particularly close to, or passenger experience that's touched you in a profound way?
Well, there's an experience which I can talk about, which is I've tried to distance myself from relationships with passengers. You know, I'm pleased to say I've done 132 missions now, and
wow,
I think we've got I think I've lost 4 patients, not meaning they haven't fallen out of the airplane. It's sadly they've passed on because their treatment hasn't worked out. So I try not to build relationships with them. I did have an incident. So all we pilots, what do we do before we take off? We check the weather and the NOTAMs, right? So what did Richard do? He checked the weather but didn't check the NOTAMs. And this was a 5-minute flight from my airport base here in Anacortes, Washington, to Lopez Island. I can almost see it from my house here. So very close. And I'm picking up a patient, taking her down to Boeing Field in Seattle for cancer treatment, radiation. So all is set. She doesn't have to do this 6-hour ferry ride and car ride and this, that, and the other. And the weather's reasonable. So I take off and I fly over the runway perpendicularly to decide which way the windsock's going. I look down, and a third of the runway, and it's 2,900 feet runway, a third of it is closed.
Oh boy.
And the patient is down there waiting for me to land, to take her to her appointment in hospital. So I go, oh my God, what have I done? You know, and with ForeFlight, of course, we can look at pretty much everything. So I check the NOTAMs as I'm overhead the field, and sure enough, the third of the airport shut down for work on the runway lights. But the other 2/3 was in use. So that left me roughly 2,000 feet, which, you know, on sea level, on a coolish day is not a problem for the Bonanza. But there are trees at one end of the runway, which normally when it's 3,000 feet, I'm keeping my fingers and toes crossed that I'm not going to take a few branches with me. So on a 2,000 foot runway, and closer to the trees, I said, no, I could land all day long, but take off, especially with a patient that is in your care and you're not a professional pilot. So I'm kicking myself and going round and round, doing circles over the airport. And we can use a cell phone, had a signal. So I called the patient who was waiting for me down below. And I said, what I'd like you to do is catch the next ferry from Lopez Island westbound to Friday Harbor. I'll land at Friday Harbor Airport and then I'll get you down to Seattle. So I said, you figure out when the next ferry is and I'll call you back in a couple of minutes. So she said, okay, fine. As I'm still circling overhead on frequency, I hear this call saying helicopter just departed Friday Harbor, the adjacent island, headed to Anacortes, my home base, over the top of this Lopez Island airport where I'm still circling. And so it was totally fortuitous. So I called this helicopter pilot on the frequency. I said, can you do me a favor? And he said, what was that? I said, I got an Angel Flight patient down there. Runway's closed. Could you go get her and take her to Friday Harbor for me? He said, sure. I just got to drop my wife off at Anacortes. I'll be right back. So I went and landed at, I communicated this to the patient. I went and landed at Friday Harbor and waited about 25 minutes, and then in comes my patient in this guy's helicopter and jumped in my Bonanza, and then we took her down to Seattle. So all worked out. She made her appointment. But that was pilot error. I did not check the NOTAMs before I left and almost really disappointed a patient. Let's put it that way. So, but thank goodness for a helicopter pilot.
I was going to say that story actually for me highlights one of the things I love most about the aviation community is I've never been anywhere where I've needed something where there hasn't been a pilot that hasn't very generously stepped up and said, yes, I can help with that. I had an Angel flight to Sacramento. This was actually a domestic violence flight where we were relocating a victim, and landing in Sacramento, we got there, and then there was fairly significant, it was cold, it was wintertime, and we were going to be leaving in the clouds, and I had some de-icing fluid, but not a sufficient amount where I felt really comfortable going through the clouds for who knows how long. And turns out that airport didn't sell de-icing fluid. But one of the people there at the FBO said, hey, there's actually somebody here who also has a Cirrus. They'll probably use the same fluid. Let me just call her real quick. And so they ring her on the phone, and she says, yep, just go to the hangar, grab whatever you need. And I said, well, how much is it? I'll pay for it. She goes, don't even worry about it. I like what you're doing for Angel Flight West.
Oh, nice.
Just pay that forward for someone else when you get the chance. And so those types of experiences are just so heartwarming, and it's such a privilege to be an aviator and have the opportunity for me to connect with so many good people doing good things in the world. And that was actually something I didn't expect to find, but it's been one of those very pleasant surprises. Is just the community in aviation is so wonderful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, well said.
So Richard, my dad always said, Alan, remember the little things. And the little things for him were the things that made the biggest difference. Are there little things in life or aviation that you would like to leave, maybe for your kids or grandkids as we wrap up our conversation here, that you feel would be the most important?
Oh, I'm not sure I can answer that. When you say little things, just help me out a little bit with for example, what would you say? For you, you go first this time, and I'll follow up.
Okay. For me, one of the things for my dad was remembering people's names, and then also noticing people. And so we would, I remember, and this is something he learned from my grandfather. My grandfather had a reputation. He worked in a hospital after he retired from the military, and he would make sure to have a compliment for every person he saw as he was going through the hospital. my dad, in his role as a leader in our church, had a rule that nobody sits alone in our church. Not a big thing, but making sure that everybody knows that they're welcome and loved. For my kids, some of the little things that I like for them to remember is simply their name. I feel like the name that my dad and my grandpa and I have tried to give them is a good name. We've been good people. And just remember who you are and to carry on that tradition. If we're talking about aviation, the little things for me, little things are, we don't have emergency takeoffs. So we check the NOTAMs and we run our checklist. We don't just blast off into the sky and hope that everything turns out okay. Or the little things, like making sure you remove the pitot cover before you fly, those types of little things. So are there little bits of advice that, maybe you would want to share with anyone who's listening or with your kids and grandkids that you feel like have led to a life of success and fulfillment for you?
Well, I think I touched on this early on, so I'll just repeat it and then I'll add something new. And that is, I encourage everybody, my kids as well, and now my grandkids, of which we have 5, that, don't do what is expected of you. Do what you love to do. And that way you will enjoy life a lot more and probably end up being very good at something. Rather than being good at something that somebody tells you you ought to do. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Second thing I'd say is smile a lot. We need to smile a lot and enjoy humor and poke fun at yourself. And I drive my granddaughter, the only one I've got, only female amongst my clan. I drive her absolutely crazy that her grandpa, tries to make her laugh all the time. So. But she'll hopefully one day she'll reflect on that like you've reflected on your grandparents and what I don't know if they taught you, but they certainly encouraged you to take a certain path. So, yeah.
Sure. I love that, Richard. Thank you again for generously giving your time to join me. There's 3 things that I hope to follow up with you on. The first one is invitation to come with you for a P-51 Mustang ride. The second one is going across the pond for a Spitfire ride.
Yeah.
And the third one will be, I would love to, at some point in the future, join you for one of those angel flights in your Bonanza and experience the Pacific Northwest. That's an area I haven't had the opportunity to fly over personally, so I think that would be enjoyable.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that you do for Angel Flight West, your willingness to give and use aviation as a tool for making a big difference in the world. I appreciate you. And this has been the Plane Success Podcast with Richard Beattie.
Thank you, Alan.